Welcome, welcome. Today's lesson is about something known as the trolley car problem. Now, there's a good chance you may have heard this story before or seen this problem before. For reasons that aren't altogether clear to me, this thought experiment has become one of the most popular things in contemporary moral discourse. I don't think there's anything else I teach in my classes that students know better than this. I guess it's been on TV shows. There's a show called The Good Place that features a trolley car problem. You can see it on social media. You can see it on places like Reddit and Twitter or X or whatever it's called. I've seen it in newspapers and magazines. It's sort of become part of the zeitgeist, which is interesting to me. I don't know why this has happened, but maybe you've heard this before. Even if you have heard it before, I'd ask you to bear with me and pay attention to the video because there's a particular point related to the trolley car problem that will help us in this course that is often glossed over in those popular portrayals. The earliest version of the trolley car problem that I'm aware of comes from Philippa Foot in an essay called The Problem of Abortion and the Doctrine of Double Effect. That's in our textbook. I encourage you to read it. The version I'm citing here comes from Michael Sandel, an old Harvard course that you can find online, one of the most popular classes in Harvard's history called Justice, the Right Thing to Do. If you look up Michael Sandel's open course, Justice, the Right Thing to Do, Episode 1, you can see his presentation of the trolley car problem, which is very good, highly recommended. In fact, Michael Sandel's course, highly recommended if you're interested in this sort of thing. I want to give him credit because the way I present this borrows very heavily from his work. So, okay, that's the names and numbers of the players. That's a little bit of background. That's more than enough waffling. Without further ado, let's get into the trolley car problem. So, imagine you are the driver of a trolley car, speeding down the tracks, and you notice ahead of you on the tracks, there are 4 people tied to the tracks. And being a good person, a responsible trolley car driver, you hit the brakes. But bad news, your brakes fail. And so now you are the driver of a runaway trolley car about to run over and kill 4 people tied to the tracks. A visual aid here, a highly technical illustration. All right, so now you are the driver of a runaway trolley car about to run over and kill these 4 helpless people tied to the tracks. And seems like there's nothing you can do until you notice at the last minute that there is an alternative to running over and killing these 4 people. You could, if you chose, turn off onto a side track to avoid running over and killing the 4 people. So there's right before you get to the 4 people, there's a switch in the tracks. And your brakes don't work, but your steering does. And so if you chose, you could steer off onto that side track to avoid running over and killing the 4 people. However, there's a proviso. There happens to be one person tied to the sidetrack. And so now you're faced with a moral dilemma. So a dilemma, technically speaking, is an either-or problem. And so you could either continue on your current trajectory straight ahead, running over and killing the 4 people, or turn off onto the sidetrack to avoid running over and killing the 4 people and run over and kill the 1 instead. For the sake of argument, let's imagine that this is a genuine dilemma. This isn't what they call a false dilemma, where there's some third choice. The reason I mention this is I always have students who want to kind of weasel out of the dilemma by imagining some alternative to running over the 4 or running over the 1. They want to, I don't know, derail the trolley car or jump out the window and run up there and untie everybody. Let's imagine that there really isn't any third option, that you really are forced to choose between running over and killing the 4 or running over and killing the 1. And second, let's imagine that there aren't any complicating factors about the 5 people tied to the tracks. I often have students who sort of, before they decide, they want to investigate the life history of everybody involved. So I don't know, and I can sort of understand why. I mean, if the 4 people on the track ahead were like Mao and Stalin and Pol Pot and Hitler, and the one on the sidetrack was like, I don't know, the Dalai Lama or Jesus Christ himself or something, that might affect your decision. Or I suppose similarly, like if the 4 people were all like terminally ill geriatric patients or like convicted felons on death row or something, and the one person, or I don't know, like complete strangers, and then the one person was like a young person in the prime of their life, or your mother, or your best friend, or your lover, that kind of thing might make a difference, you know. But for the sake of argument, let's imagine that you don't know any of these people, you don't have any special relationship to any of these people, neither of them are especially good or especially bad or especially old or especially young, that as far as you know, these are just ordinary people of sort of, what, roughly equal moral value or moral worth or something. Okay, so now, with all that stipulated, what should you do? Should you go straight ahead, running over and killing the 4, or turn off on the sidetrack to avoid running over and killing the 4, and run over and kill the 1 instead? At this point, I encourage you to pause the video, make a note of what you would do, and more importantly, why you would do it. In this class, you get 1% credit for what you think and 99% credit for why you think what you think. And so, what is the right thing to do? And what reason do you have for that choice? Okay, hopefully you've made a note of your choice. You probably, in all likelihood, made the same choice that 70, 80, 90% of people do when presented with this scenario. That is, that you should turn off onto the sidetrack to avoid running over and killing the 4 and run over and kill the 1 instead. And if I ask you why, you probably gave a reason something like this. That, you know, it's a tragic dilemma. It's unfortunate that anybody should have to die, but in a situation like this, the right thing to do is the best thing to do. And the best thing to do is the thing that will result in the least loss of life. And so you should turn off onto the sidetrack and kill the 1 to avoid killing the 4. It's better that the 1 should die so that the 4 could live. That is, the right thing to do is minimize the loss of life. That seems like a good reason. It's the kind of reason that Truman used when he decided to drop the atomic bomb on Hiroshima and Nagasaki, that although it would result in the loss of innocent life in those cities, lives were already being lost in the firebombing of Tokyo, and even more lives would be lost if the war was prolonged, and it brought about an end to the war. or it's the reason that we regard the passengers on United 93 on 9/11 as heroes. They heroically decided to crash land the plane. Of course, everybody on board died, but they prevented the plane from reaching its target and killing even more people. And so, those are considered good things because they minimize the loss of life, arguably. It's the kind of decision that's made in triage situations. And so it's ordinary kind of moral reasoning. When presented with a tragic dilemma, do the thing that results in the least harm. Okay, so far so good. But now here's version 2 of the trolley car problem. A similar scenario to the first version. There's a runaway trolley car about to run over and kill 4 people, only this time you're not the driver, you're an onlooker, and there is no sidetrack. And so the trolley car has run away, about to run over and kill the 4 people tied to the tracks. And you were an onlooker, helplessly observing the soon-to-be tragic death of these 4 poor people tied to the tracks. You're even more helpless than before. There's no sidetrack to turn off of. You're not the driver, and so you're just helplessly watching from a bridge overlooking the tracks. It really seems like there's nothing you can do. Until you notice, at the last second, that there is something you could do. That standing next to you on the bridge is a very, very massive human being. In ordinary parlance, we'd call this a fat guy. And the fat guy is leaning over the railing right above the tracks in such a way that you could, if you chose to, give him a good push to his death off the bridge onto the tracks, where he would surely die. But he's so massive that when the trolley car struck him and killed him, his mass would slow the momentum of the speeding trolley car, saving the 4 people tied to the tracks. So let's see what that looks like. So here's our fat guy. Now, of course, I have students who find the physics involved in this implausible, but for the sake of argument, let's imagine that this is a real decision, that you could either push the fat guy to his death, but resulting in saving the 4 people tied to the track, or you could refrain from pushing the fat guy to his death and let the trolley car continue ahead and kill the 4 people. And let's imagine that this is a genuine dilemma again. Push the fat guy, killing the 1, saving the 4, or refrain from pushing the fat guy, and the result would be the 4 dying. What would you do in this scenario? Would you push him? Again, I think it would help to pause the video, jot down your answer, and make a note of your reason. Now, in this second scenario, I always have a few students, maybe 20 or 30%, who say that they would push the fat guy. And the reason in this case is the same as it was in the first case, that it's a tragic dilemma. It's unfortunate that anybody should have to die, but it's better that the 1 should die so that the 4 could live. The right thing to do is the thing that results in the least loss of life, etc., etc. And to their credit, I mean, at least they had the virtue of, intellectual, rational consistency. Although I wouldn't recommend standing next to them on any bridges. But the majority of people, interestingly, in this case, refused to push the fat guy And so the majority of people are faced with kind of a bit of cognitive dissonance here, a bit of aporia. I mean, you find out that you believe two things about the world that can't both be true at the same time. I mean, in the first case, you say it's better that one should die so that four could live. But in this case, you say don't push the fat guy. Well, what became of the principle that you endorsed in the first case? Why doesn't that apply in this case? Students often kind of give me all kinds of sort of silly answers, trying to resolve this dissonance, trying to figure out why they have these contradictory intuitions. I mean, I'll hear things like, well, it's the putting your hands on him that's the problem. It's like, well, okay, suppose you don't have to put your hands on him. Suppose he's standing over a trap door that's operated by a steering wheel. Would you drop the fat guy then? And well, they still want to do it. And so it's hard to say why we should kill one to spare the four in the first case, but not the second case. But usually, in the second case, essentially the students say something like this, like, it doesn't matter whether or not pushing that fat guy would save those people, because that would be murder. That is the intentional killing of an innocent. That is a violation of his human rights. That is, pushing him to his death would make you a murderer, regardless of the consequences. It's against the rules. It's something you're not allowed to do. I'll sometimes have students at this point who still want to push the fat guy. And so for this, if you're in the 20 or 30% of people who want to push the fat guy, I present you with a third scenario. Imagine that you're a transplant surgeon. And you have 4 terminally ill patients, all in desperate need of an organ transplant. One of them needs a heart, and one of them needs a kidney, and one of them needs a lung, and one of them needs a liver or something. But you don't have any healthy organs, and so you're going to have to helplessly watch your 4 sick patients die, knowing that if only you had healthy organs, you could save all 4 of them. And as you're sitting in your office contemplating this tragedy, it occurs to you that there is something you could do to save your 4 sick patients. You have a healthy patient coming in for a checkup in a few hours. And you could, when he comes in, sneak into the waiting room with some like chloroform or something, sedate him, put him on a gurney, wheel him to the back, harvest his 4 healthy organs. Of course, he would surely die, but then you could use those 4 healthy organs to save your sick patients. Would you kill the healthy patient to save the sick patient? The vast majority says that they wouldn't do that. For the same kind of reason that most people don't want to push the fat guy. As a physician, you have an obligation not to harm your healthy patients. You took an oath that placed you under an obligation. Your healthy patient has rights, and killing the healthy patient would violate his rights. But again, we find ourselves contradicting the principle that it's better that one should die so that 4 could live, that the needs of the many outweigh the needs of the few. You see, there's this real tension between the notion of promoting the general welfare and doing what's best for the majority and protecting individual rights and doing our duty. And this tension, actually, if you understand these sort of conflicting intuitions about the nature of morality, you're in a good position to understand a great deal of the debate in contemporary moral philosophy. And so the point of the trolley car problem, at least for me, is to draw out these 2 conflicting intuitions. So the first intuition is called consequentialist. And so consequentialism is the idea that the right thing to do is the thing that results in the best consequences. That really, the morality of our actions is primarily a matter of the results of our actions. So consequentialism is sort of teleological. That is, it says that morality has a purpose, it has a telos, it has a thing towards which it aims, and it aims towards promoting the general welfare or that is doing the right thing is about doing the thing that has the best consequences. Usually takes the form of what's called utilitarianism, that you should do the thing that results in the most happiness for the most people. Chances are, if you advocate killing the one to save the four, in any of the three scenarios that I presented you, you appeal to some kind of a consequenceless moral position. That is, you should kill the one to save the four because given the scenario, that decision has the best consequences, it results in the best future. But in other versions of the trolley car problem, in version 2, or the third thought experiment I presented you with, people hesitate to endorse that same kind of thinking. They say that I don't care about the consequences, I don't care how many people would save, pushing the fat guy is wrong. It's murder, it's a violation of his rights. Killing the healthy patient is wrong, it's murder, it's a violation of his rights. Something I'm obligated not to do. It's something I as a physician have a duty not to do. This way of thinking about ethics is called deontology. So this is just a fancy word that means the science of duty or the science of obligations. So you can call this deontological or just duty ethics. The ethics of obligation. And for the duty ethicist or the deontological ethicist, morality is not a matter of the consequences of our actions. Morality is primarily a matter of rights and obligations. And so the right thing to do is the thing you're obligated to do. That is, for the deontologist, morality is a matter of rules. Pushing the fat guy is murder, it's against the rules. He has a right to life, you're obligated not to kill him. And that's regardless of the consequences. There are a number of different deontological moral theories. We've already seen in this course something called the divine command theory, according to which we have obligations to do as God commands, not to kill and not to steal and not to lie. And we have God-given rights. And so like you have a God-given right to property, which means I have an obligation not to steal from you. But it need not be theistic. There's something called the social contract theory, according to which we have a social contract. That is, we've agreed to live in a society where people have a right to life and a right to property, and thereby placed ourselves under obligations not to kill and steal, in exchange for other people placing themselves under obligations not to do the same. And you know, if somebody breaks that contract, then they owe a debt to society or something like that. Or we're going to see later this semester the moral philosophy of Immanuel Kant, who was a duty ethicist. He thought there was something called a categorical imperative. And so there are some different ideas of where the rights and obligations come from, but the key thing for the deontological ethicist is that morality is about rights and obligations. It is about rules or laws. It's not about consequences. And so we have here the trolley car problem. Most people have these conflicting intuitions. Sometimes we think the best thing is the thing that results in the best future, and sometimes we think we should follow the rules regardless of the consequences. If you've understood that distinction, you know what you need to know for this lesson. I'd be more than happy to discuss this with you in the discussion boards. And we'll be getting into consequentialism and deontology over the next couple weeks.